Hello and welcome everyone to this Let's Chat on falling into time change. My name is Dr. Ashley Wildman. For those of you who have not met me yet, I'm a licensed professional counselor and I work with patients at True Women's Health. And I want to welcome you to talking about the mood changes that happen as you can see it's getting darker earlier in the night. And I think especially there is this thing with the time change. We go from daylight saving time to standard time, and that is a fallback. And that Sunday, when that happens, it's glorious because we get to sleep in for that extra hour. It's like, oh, there's this time to sleep. And then on Monday, we go to work and we get done with work, and all of a sudden you're like, it was not this dark when I got done with work on Friday. And now that it's Monday and we've had the time change, now we're suddenly dark. And that's what I want to talk about tonight is just how do we deal with this sudden change as we go into these winter months. So here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about the what, why, and who. And then because Dr. Bittner, trained me to do these Let's Chat things, we're going to have 5 tips and 5 questions. Usually her questions are about what you can ask your provider. Tonight, I'm going to have 5 questions you can ask yourself. And then at the end, if you have any questions, I'll answer those. So yeah, please put your comments or questions into the chat. And at the end, I will answer any questions you might have. So let's get started. There is a diagnostic disorder called seasonal affective disorder. It's basically a extreme form of, it's a form of depression, and it can impact somebody's ability to live their life in an effective way. That is pretty rare, but not totally rare. So they estimate around 5% of people have full-blown seasonal affective disorder. However, there's also a possibility that around 20% of people have kind of a mild form of seasonal affective disorder. So this is something that a lot of you guys might be experiencing. This is 1 in 5 people have this. And if you think about the fact that this is more common the further you get away from the equator. So if you live in Michigan, you are more likely to experience signs of seasonal affective disorder or the mild that doesn't meet the full diagnostic criteria than if you were living in Florida or Texas or something like that. So those of you who are snowbirds at this point, you figured it out. That's great. But for those of us who have to stay in Michigan where it is cold and snowy and gets dark early, here's some things you can do. Because even if you don't have full-blown seasonal affective disorder, you still might be experiencing some of these mood changes and anxiety changes. So let's talk about what it is that you can do. Oh, I have notes here that told me I'm supposed to tell a story. Okay, so this was many years ago. One of my first jobs as a professional counselor, I was actually working at a church. And I remember there was a woman who had called in and she had asked to speak to a pastor about her seasonal affective disorder and divorcing her husband. And the pastors at this church, this is a big church, there are a lot of pastors. Pastors are like, okay, we'll talk with somebody about divorce, but you could start using mental health terms. We're gonna not necessarily deal with that. So they said, hey, Ashley, will you talk to this person who called in? And I'm like, sure, whatever. So I call this woman and say, hey, what's going on? How can we help you? And she was saying, like, I have seasonal affective disorder. And in order to treat it, I need to move to Arizona. but my husband won't move to Arizona with me, so I need to get a divorce. So basically, I think why she was calling the church, even though she didn't go to our church, is she wanted um, kind of a special dispensation that, okay, you can get a divorce because of this mental health issue, not realizing that there are much less extreme ways to treat the sadness and depression that can happen when it's not so light out anymore. So, what are those things? So, I'm going to talk about 5 tips, and they are expectations, light, sleep, movement, and vitamin D. So, each of those, first of all, expectations. This is something I'm prepping for this. I looked at all these different things that are all these tips, and I don't see anybody really talking about this. So I think one of the reasons why we experience this sadness, this depression, this lack of motivation, sleeping more, eating more, all those things is not necessarily about the length of the daylight versus the night. I think a lot of it is about the change from, the summer where we have like 15 hours sometimes of daylight versus the winter where we're down to 7 or 8 hours. So it's that change, not necessarily the amount of time that it's night, but this, yeah, change. I just said that like 5 different ways. Okay. So that is, I think, one of the things that it's going on. Another thing that we think that is possible is that because there's less light, you have less stimulation of serotonin and more stimulation of melatonin. And both of those can impact mood and sleep and all this other stuff. So here's what I'm thinking. As you go into winter, part of what winter can be is what we have at the end of different yoga. So let's go to yoga. At the end of yoga, there's often this time where you're in this shavasana pose, corpse pose, where you are laying down and you are accommodating what you've been doing in your yoga practice for that yoga session. There's a sense in which we need to have a time in our year that we are resting and reflecting on what we've been doing throughout the year. But somehow, instead of having this time where we can really reflect and look back at what we're doing and also look forward to what we can do in the future when the sun comes back and the spring flowers come up. Instead, we're dealing with Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. We have all these expectations for what we're going to do. And rather than saying, okay, I have to do X, Y, and Z, I want you to start to challenge those things. Do you really have to move to Arizona and divorce your husband? Do you really have to have the most perfect Christmas cards? Do they have to get there before Christmas, or is it okay if they maybe show up in January? Asking yourself, what expectations do you have for winter, and seeing what are those that you can take away. I don't want to necessarily say lower the expectations, but can we instead have expectations of having time to rest and reflect? So that's not something I'm seeing in a lot of the how to deal with seasonal affective disorder, but it's something I want you guys to keep in mind. All right. So that is the expectations piece. Next, I want to talk a little bit about light. So this is probably the best way to treat seasonal affective disorder. It's better than medication or therapy. It's this idea of getting light. And you don't necessarily have to go out and purchase a therapy light or a light box, is what they're sometimes called. But if you find yourself struggling with having motivation and energy, this is a good place to start. What you're going to be looking for is a light that is at least 10,000 lux, Lux, and going to use that in the morning for 15 to 30 minutes. And please, I don't know what quite the difference is between lux and lumens and all that other stuff. I just know that this is something very different than what you get in a tanning bed. A tanning bed has ultraviolet lights, and this can stimulate things like vitamin D production, but it's not the same thing as getting light that stimulates the serotonin. So what that needs to be is something that's coming into your eyes. You're not staring at a therapy light or a light box. It's just something where you're getting more of that light in your face. So a lot of people will, while they're having their morning coffee, having breakfast, maybe, nobody reads the morning paper anymore. So scrolling through Twitter or Instagram on your phone in the morning, whatever it is you do in the morning for 15 to 20 minutes, having that light. Thing I would like to mention is that in some people, this light therapy can induce a manic episode. So if you find yourself with symptoms of mania, this might be something to be like, okay, either you need to stop doing it altogether, or maybe cut down on the amount of time that you're using it. Because light is so important this time of year, be very careful about the light you're getting later in the day. So light therapy is something we do early in the morning, like pretty much first thing we wake up. I wouldn't do it after 10 a.m. And then being very careful at night so that you don't get a lot of light. So watching TV, scrolling through your phone just before bed are things that, if you're having trouble sleeping, probably need to be avoided, especially in the winter when you're a little bit more sensitive to the light. All right, so that's expectations, light. Let's talk about sleep. I know that Dr. Bittner talks about getting those 2 sleep cycles in. It's okay in the winter to sleep a little bit more, just because of how our body is reacting to this time of the year. So if you find yourself sleeping more, I don't want you to beat yourself up and say, well, I'm lazy or things like that. Your body might need more sleep in the winter than it does at other times of the year. So first of all, if that's a change, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I find if you are having to always wake up to an alarm, that's probably a sign that you need to go to bed a little bit earlier. A great thing I wanted to share, this book is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. I like this book on sleep because, unlike some of the other books, I feel like it's less judgmental, of like, you're not as afraid afterwards of like, oh my goodness, I'm ruining my health. I think it does talk about the health benefits of sleep, but is a little less judgmental about it. So if you're having trouble sleeping, this might be a good book to pick up. Another thing that can be helpful in the winter to have better sleep is a weighted blanket. That is something that a lot of people find useful if they're having trouble getting that deeper sleep. But definitely, if you need more sleep during the winter, that's okay. Where I would get concerned is above 10 hours. If you're sleeping more than 10 hours a night, that should be something that you check in with your health provider in some way. So that's why we're here at True. So sleep, movement is the next thing I want to talk about. So there's a book I read several years ago. It's called Younger Next Year, and I think they just made this up, but I like it. Okay, so I'm going to share it with you. Basically, if they were saying like our caveman ancestor people, that the only times they didn't move were when you're sick, when you're injured, or when there's a famine. And so they said you need to move every day to tell your body it's okay, that you're not sick, that you're not injured, and that there's not a famine going on. Okay, so have some movement. And this might look different in the winter than it does in the summer, because of the decreased light, because of snow and other things. But if you can move outside, I would say try to do that, especially in the mornings. If you can get outside early in the day, get some sunlight, get some fresh air, that's going to be the best movement. But any movement is good because it's going to tell your body that it's okay. Like I said, I think these people just made that up, but I kind of like it. Um, and then lastly, vitamin D. And I will just say with this one, I am not a physician. I am not a dietitian. So please ask somebody before beginning a vitamin D regimen. But I will say what I do in the winter is I take 5,000 unit pills every Sunday, as a way to get my vitamin D up. And it's believed that vitamin D can help with depression. So, yeah, that is not, again, the light boxes, they do not provide UV radiation to allow your body to process vitamin D. So you might need to supplement that. All right, so those are my 5 tips. And then I'm going to go quickly through these 5 questions. And these are questions to ask yourself. The first is, of course, I have to do this because I work at True. How am I doing on my seeds? The seeds are a great place to start figuring out what are some things you can change, to feel better, and to have less anxiety and depression in the winter. And again, because it's winter, they might change. You might, like, for example, in the winter, it gets kind of dry. And so you might need more water, but drinking doesn't really feel the same in the winter. You're not as thirsty, even though you need more water. So maybe you look into some herbal teas that you can drink instead. So something without caffeine, but something warm and that has some flavor to it might be able to get you into to have more fluids. So yeah, just be sure that you're aware that the seeds are there. They're great year round. They might have to change a little bit during the winter. Excuse me. Second question, what can I say no to? So if you find yourself really overwhelmed this time of year, try to figure out what it is that you can say no to and take off your plate, so that you're not overwhelmed by expectations that you have for yourself or that others have for yourself. Next is, how can I incorporate more light in my morning? So if you don't get a light box, are there other ways you can have more light? So turning on all the lights, being sure that if you do have windows that face the early morning sun, how can you get more light to come in those windows? I have a friend who a few years ago, like she was like, I just don't feel like doing anything. And I went over to her apartment and her windows weren't great, but all of her shades were closed and she didn't have very many lamps. So really pay attention to that. It can impact your mood. So yeah, find some way to get more light in your morning. Then next is, what is one thing I can do today to improve my sleep tonight? So maybe when you get done with, watching this on a screen, which is giving you blue light and making your melatonin messed up, whatever, you're going to say, okay, no more screens for tonight. Maybe you're going to drink something warm before bed to kind of relax you. Maybe you're going to do some gratitude exercises before bed. So look at what is one thing you can do to improve your sleep tonight. And then finally, what is one way I can move tomorrow in a way that tells my body I'm okay? So I don't want you guys going out and exercising tonight. It's late. This is not a great time to exercise. But tomorrow there's something you can do to move. And so what is that thing going to be? So those are my 5 tips and my 5 questions to be asking yourself. And so I'm just going to give you a couple minutes. Let me see if I see any questions. I don't see any questions here yet, but I'll give you a minute or two. And I'm really sorry. I should have looked to see what our next Let's Chat thing is. But definitely visit us at True Women's Health. If you find that you are not able to, if you're not able to function, if you're really missing motivation in the winter and these tips are not helping you, please come in and talk to us because you might need something a little bit more. But I definitely want to say if you feel tired and sluggish and unmotivated, especially as it's getting darker earlier, you're not alone. This is a very common thing. And I want you guys to go out and find some light, get some good sleep, do some movement. And any questions, comments, concerns? Know that there were a lot of people who RSVP'd, so just going to give you a minute. And I believe our next Let's Chat is in the first week of November. So we'll hope to see you then. All right. Well, it doesn't look like there's any questions, but thank you guys so much. If you do have further questions, you can contact me at True Women's Health or talk with one of our providers here. Thanks so much. Okay. I do see a question. So as a person with MDD, I am now in menopause and struggling again with depression. Yes, like there is something about I'm trying to think like what my word is, like when we're going through menopause. And I know Dr. Bittner talks about, and this is why I brought it up with the light, is that it's not so much that, your hormones, it's the change in the hormones, not the overall hormones that are really like that mess with our mood and our motivation and that sort of thing. So yes, I'm glad that you recognize like what you're struggling with, and definitely menopause can impact our mood, and then having the kind of the winter blahs don't help with that. So yeah, the question then is wondering what can help other than adding meds. So yes, definitely the light therapy is probably going to be the biggest bang for your buck, because like I said, it's found, especially when you're dealing with depression that gets worse in the winter. Light is even better than meds. Exercise is also a good one. So if we can get up and get moving, there's something about that really helps. So I would say, if those things don't work, then I consider like, okay, what about meds? But those are a couple of things that are good to try if you're wanting to look at some more natural stuff first. So. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Have a great evening. And hopefully I see you guys here at True Women's Health when you come in to either talk with me or talk with one of our other providers. Have a good night.